Hey, it's Patricia Murphy. It's Tuesday, and this is Seattle Now. Here in Seattle, we're safe from the wildfires, but until this mega plume of acrid smoke blows out of here, the air is not safe to breathe. This feels personal to environmental writer Emma Marris, who lives in Oregon but has family here in Seattle. She wrote a piece for The Atlantic, and in a minute, she'll tell us what she thinks we can do. But first, let's get you caught up. A grim milestone in Washington state. The Department of Health says more than 2,000 people have died from COVID-19. The DOH says about half the deaths can be linked to long-term care facilities. COVID deaths also reveal huge racial disparities. Pacific Islanders, Latinos, American Indians, and Alaska Natives are dying from COVID-19 at the highest rates in Washington state. Black Lives Matter Seattle-King County wants Seattle's Ethics and Elections Commission to open an investigation into actions by some city council members. The letter went out Monday and asks the commission to look into 10 separate issues, including actions during an early June demonstration. It also asks the SEEC to determine whether the council exercised due diligence when it approved a series of cuts to SPD's budget in August. And we didn't get that rain we hoped for. So the super massive smoke plume coming from wildfires in California and Oregon, yeah, that's going to stick around. Josh Clark is a meteorologist with Washington's Department of Natural Resources, and he says we're likely to have unhealthy and very unhealthy air quality for the rest of the work week.
These fires in California and Oregon, they're still producing smoke. What we're seeing is that smoke layer that we've had just be reinforced by additional smoke. And so it's going to take some time to get a very strong westerly wind, to bring about some change in air quality here.
So if you're able, stay inside, keep your windows closed, and crank up that air purifier. Beaches, parks, and playfields are closed until Wednesday because of the smoke. Environmental writer Emma Marris says wide open spaces and the ability to escape is the allure of the West. But now these fires means there's no escape. She's written in The Atlantic saying politicians knew the climate change would stoke bigger fires, but did nothing to stop it. Originally from Seattle, she now lives in Oregon. Emma, thanks a lot for taking the time.
Glad to be here.
So wildfires are just part of our life here out west, but these fires in particular have been ferocious. What is different?
Yeah, so for me, the big difference is how claustrophobic this feels, because unlike other years of bad smoke in certain spotty areas across the West, this is the whole West, the whole shebang from Mexico to British Columbia. So there's nowhere to go to escape this. And even if we did want to bolt and head somewhere with a green air quality dot on the map, there's a pandemic on. So traveling is much riskier and much more difficult than it would normally be. So I'm looking out the window at smoke and I'm feeling extremely claustrophobic in a part of the country that always felt open to me.
I agree. I moved out west from New Jersey, and one of the things that I moved out here for was because I felt like I was standing on the edge of everything, that it was just this amazing space filled with giant sky and green trees. And when I woke up and realized that the smoke was not going to be clearing out of here like they said it would, my heart literally, it sank. I felt my chest feel heavy. I completely agree that we feel trapped in this smoke. I wonder, did we miss warning signs?
I mean, the big one here is climate change. When it comes to how did a particular forest manage itself over the last few decades, that story is going to be different up and down the coast because there's many different types of forests. The east side, the west side have very different dynamics, different, species of trees, different management regimes. So in some places, I think there's definitely a conversation to be had about how the management has gone. But if there's one constant along the whole coast, every forest, it's climate change.
In your piece, you wrote about what Western culture means to you and how you see it as distinct from other places in the U.S. Where is the distinction?
Well, there's a lot of the sort of mythos of the West that's really problematic. A lot of it comes from settler colonialist ideas that this was a big empty place that white people were showing up into. So there's a lot to critique and push back against there. But there is one part of the sort of Western mythology that I have always clung to, and that is the notion that there's space out here. I mean, if you look at a map of public lands, for example, we just have much more public land than we can access than in the East. And we just have much lower population density. There is a culture of being able to escape. Getting in the car and going is a way to cope in the West. And it's just not happening right now.
And yet our dependence on car culture is part of the problem that we have here.
Yes, that's true. I mean, this is a crisis that's been, like any complicated crisis, it's got a lot of different causes. But climate change is the big one, the one that I'm focused on as an environmental journalist. And yes, me driving around as a teenager all over the West contributed to climate change. But honestly, my message for people is to really set that sort of personal guilt aside and take a look at the sort of bigger systemic organization of our country and policies at the state, federal level. Those are the things that are going to make a really big difference in turning this around, not necessarily us taking fewer road trips. Ultimately, what I'm going to try to do with my anger, I have a lot of anger. It's kind of running through my veins right now. I can sometimes even feel it sort of sizzle, like my blood is sizzling. And my goal is to really use that anger to do productive action to make things better rather than just let it eat me up.
Yeah. You're from Seattle. You're living in Oregon now, and you're watching your states burn.
Yeah.
It must be very difficult. You are one of the people who can actually see this differently than just, somebody like who's not familiar with climate, who doesn't study the environment. You can see so much more deeply into this. It must be so frustrating.
Well, and it's really hit home. I mean, as a sort of private person, I am on the board of an organization called Rogue Climate, which is a climate activist group here in Southern Oregon, and their offices burned to the ground. They're totally gone. So, this is not super abstract to me at the moment. It's feeling pretty present. I can smell it. I can taste it in my throat, and I can see it in the pictures of this building that I spent so much time in just being rubble.
Is there anything right now that's giving you hope? Is there anything you're particularly holding on to as a point of control that you can have in this situation?
I think that our society has often given us this illusion of more control than we really have. In a world where you can buy something off the internet, it shows up 24 hours later, stream whatever movie you want. It's not like the old days where you have to wait for it to come onto the television. I feel like we have this sense of control that's exaggerated, and this is a really humbling experience for a lot of us to really realize I don't have control about whether I can let my kids play outside or go outside myself. I don't have control about where I could be in the region. So little things like, okay, I'm going to make some tasty dinner tonight for myself, for my family, and we're going to have a good time with that. And then tomorrow I'm going to say, okay, what can I do for Rogue Climate, or what can I do for my local candidate for city council to help them get elected, to make sure that they can push things in the right direction. For me, my therapy really is 75% action and 25%, ice cream, Korean dramas on television, those kinds of things. You have to take care of yourself, but really being part of some collective response is so important. So that sense of feeling small and tiny and isolated, the solution to that is to try to group together with others virtually for now and take action as a group, because those collectives are so much stronger than our individual actions.
Does that extend to the states as well? Do the Western states, could they band together to try to fix some of these problems?
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about that ever since the earlier days of the pandemic when we had this Western Pact, and we had...
I remember.
Yeah. And I do think that it makes a lot of sense for at least California, Oregon, and Washington to be thinking about this much more regionally, especially in terms of climate change and forest fire. There's already a lot of sharing of resources and sort of situational awareness across these borders, and I think that that's a good sign. I think that this problem is bigger than any one state at this time. So certainly the pandemic and these forest fires are both showing that a regional, if not national, response is required.
These conditions have been described as historic, but there have also been some climate issues that have been historic around these, like the winter we had. Can you talk about what's different about why the forests are just ablaze?
Yeah, so just the other day, since these fires started, I started going back and looking at some of the government reports that came out in the late 1980s predicting exactly this. The EPA sent a report to Congress saying that wildfire in the West was going to become more frequent and more intense due to climate change. So we've known this was going to happen for over 30 years. I mean, the basic mechanism is not that hard to conceptualize. If you have higher temperatures and less precipitation, you end up with just more dry, hot, tindery stuff on the ground that's able to burn. I mean, it's not that different from how often you need to water your garden to keep your plants from dying. The hotter and the drier it is, the more it becomes fuel for a fire like this. And then what we had with this fire was also some pretty intense winds that we were able to really just kind of, it's like blowing on the base of your campfire, just able to really like push those fires to the next level. And it's true that most ignition sources are either human caused or they're lightning or something like that. But what makes the difference is how much that fire spreads and how bad it gets. So the same ignition event might have produced a fire that was 1/10 the size than the fires we're seeing now. There's been some scientific research to show that forest fires, there's twice as many now as there were in the 1980s.
Emma Marris, really good to talk to you. Thanks.
Nice to be here.
Hi, I'm Patricia Murphy, host of Seattle Now. Thank you for watching. If you think this work is important and want to support us, subscribe to our channel, leave us a comment, and check out KUOW.org for local news.